Hello there, and welcome to Weird Music on the Glumberger channel. Strange music show where we dive into a different album each and every week, right? Something randomly picked by myself, usually, for the most part. So, in today's episode, we'll be returning to the world of Steve Roden. As I managed to find some time to sit down with some of my favourite albums once again. This, alongside Proximities, which is now we did look at on the channel previously, was amongst some of my first introductions to line Imprint and to the wider body of Steve Roden's work. This is without a doubt one of my favourites amongst all of the albums by Steve Roden, and it's a very strange one that I find very hypnotising. Difficult to explain, but I will try my best, of course, across this video, of course. So today I present Airforms by Steve Roden. So, what is Airforms? Well, we will go into this in a little bit more detail when we discuss the liner notes a bit later into this video, actually. But a brief rundown. This is an album by Steve Roden released on Line Imprint on the 1st of September 2005 as its 22nd official release. A work inspired by an unusual form of conceptual architecture. Very peculiar. Essentially, this concept was creating inflated balloon structures and then spraying concrete over them. Very weird and fascinating, and Roden, inspired by this concept, ran with it and created this art installation that featured 5 objects, all housing speakers that loop sounds sourced from Roden's breath. It creates this very physical art concept, essentially, but the music is something I find to be incredible, essentially. Very bizarre and strange, and yet one of my top favourite things for Steve Roden, I have to say. A hypnotising composition of lowercase notions that has you completely forgetting time itself when you just listen to it. And as mentioned, alongside Proximities, this was among some of the first works by Steve Roden I ever heard when I went to explore the entire body of Steve Roden's work, following the standard introduction by forms of paper, right? I'm very excited to discuss this one, so let's of course dive in. So what opens up this composition then? You have to begin with essentially a very strange, deeply resonating hum of a singular sustained note, a faint low end in the background like the buzzing of electronic generators. And listening to this with headphones, of course, you've got this swell of sounds that just occupy various spots of your hearing, essentially, just rising out like the faint glow of sounds themselves, accompanied by the most unusual tone of frequencies here and there. It's very quiet to begin with, starting off very subtly before all just rises in volume and sound the more all just starts to progress. And in amongst the looping of those very longly held tones, it's like there's an assortment of just twinkling little notes here and there, like the chimes or a series of bells, as well as the faint murmurations of objects being moved and scraped around. And of course, varying drones from high to low frequencies interacting with the compositions, just rising and rising with the very breath of air themselves. It is without a doubt one of the most hypnotising compositions from Roden, just this strange alien sound that just expands outward like very breath itself, each expanse interacting with the sounds themselves, around that form in around amongst them, disturbing them and shifting them around the place, leaving these very faint remnants of murmuring frequencies with each and every swell. With the particulars of the sounds coming across the way they do, it has this very lulling quality, I have to say, a pure pendulum effect as it just rocks back and forth with each and every iteration of the loops. It's amazing because they all feel, for the most part, rather unsettling and but also very familiar in their odd way, especially when you become used to the particulars of each and every individual tone. Like, you seem to have particular characters scattered throughout the composition, you know. One tone sounds this way, one tone sounds that way, and they all just expand outward. They just loop in amongst this sort of idiosyncratic, arrhythmic structure, perhaps. And as it all occurs, you have these incredibly minute details that differentiate in such amazingly subtle ways as a result of all of those loops just occurring almost randomly against each other. Alongside it, though, there's this very odd little occurrence of faint hiss, though. The linear frequency still vibrating in the air itself, you know, and that gradually building low end occurring throughout. And it results, for me, you know, in this amazingly amorphous composition that feels like some great living entity sitting there, breathing with these fantastic resonating sounds. And the whole thing just completely stuns me, just always hypnotizing whenever I sit down to listen to it, and just lulls me into a deep, unsettling slumber, which made writing this review very difficult, I have to admit. But the more it all occurs, the more it all just feels like this is starting to threaten to crumble underneath its own weight entirely. You know, the sounds just loop over and over and over, you know, all occurring across their different lengths of time, eventually introducing different layers that feel like new characters entering the scene here and there. And with those loops being different lengths, as we've mentioned, they all interact with each other in these odd, different, unusual ways, you know, coming in at certain moments and creating these unusually odd musical sections that feel very engrossing and enticing. And it's like, because of how it all sounds, like it's all growing and growing, just getting bigger and grander, even though so much of it is comprised of these rather lowercase notions. And with that main swell of sound being so consistent and, as it occurs, even more louder, you know, it just becomes such an anchor for the entire composition itself, with everything else just being this tapestry of details that paint a clearer picture of the entire image. One of the very strange details, you know, especially when you get strange occurrences of interference that start to just rattle through your head when they occurred, like, you know, much more into this composition. It's very unusual when they happen because they are so bombarding ultimately. Like, there's these interferences that are just crackling away, like, you know, these frequencies intertwined into your very brain itself. But I find them odd, strange, and incredibly enticing for some reason. And as a result, you know, of this and all of those, you know, swells of sound that come across very ambient in a way, it's just one of my favourite compositions from Roden as a result. This unusual alien world born from these incredibly strange structures produced from literal expanses of air. So what is actually happening here? Why is this so hypnotizing and entrancing and yet so alien and strange? So, as with all of our albums by Steve Roden, we do go through the liner notes to get the context that sufficiently explains everything, and for this one, we are told the following. Airforms was first presented at the Scottsdale Museum of Contemporary Art, Scottsdale, Arizona, in April of 2004. The work was inspired by a group of experimental houses designed by Wallace Neff in the 1940s using a process he called airform construction. The houses were built by spraying concrete over an inflated balloon structure. Inspired by the Nautilus seashell, the houses were an investigation into the aesthetic probabilities of structures formed by air and the psychological effects of living inside a kind of organic space. The installation attempted to reflect Neff's idea in the use of air as an inspirational skeleton and physical presence in the construction of the forms as well as the audio. 5 objects were built by layering plaster over small balloons. The sound work was created using a transformed sound of breath blown through an old wooden organ pipe, both essentially built from Roden's own breath. The original multi-channel audio work consisted of 5 small speakers, each placed within a single plaster form. The version for this CD has been reorganized for stereo listening. The lack of narrative structure attempts to create an audio space in line with Neff's architectural interest in the Airform projects. So I have to say, this is without a doubt one of the coolest concepts for an art installation. Like, I just adored the execution of this entire concept, from the literal physical media, the artwork and the structures created for the very piece, as well as the sounds of this album that we have as a result. like a fair amount of albums from Line, the music itself is perhaps an approximation of the very experience itself that one would feel when being in that room, gazing at those structures essentially. With it all occurring randomly, especially with those speakers being housed in each and every structure essentially, you would just get these sort of randomized loops of, that occur. But then here on the CD, we have kind of like a consolidation of all that. And with it all occurring randomly, you kind of just have Roden's classic experience of site-specific experience here, of course. But as always, I appreciate that we have these versions that act as wonderful relics of those very experiences, a version that exists for people to still experience in their own place and time. People like me, for example. And the sound element is one that astounds me whenever I hear it, though. Like, you have this slow, unassuming patience that comes through the entire thing. The loops just occurring, creating this intertwining tapestry of sounds that result in something so engrossing and very hypnotizing. And I just adore the entire thing, I have to say. I just love the amazing unification of art and sound that Roden explored in the creation of this very piece. This amazing physical experience born from the act of breathing, present in a number of contexts here. Both from the literal structures created for the art installation to the very sounds produced by blowing through the wooden pipe organ itself, creating these wonderful expanses of drone essentially. It results in an album that just fills your entire being whenever you hear it. Like, as I have mentioned, this has always been one of my top favourites from Steve Roden, as I even actually mentioned on Bandcamp itself as well on this very album. Airforms was one of the first albums I went to check out following the introduction to Forms of Paper. And after that one, I remember then going to listen to Proximities, an album which we did previously explore, of course. But yeah, as a result of them both being my favourites, I wanted to explore both of them on this channel, and I'm glad we've come around to discussing Airforms here essentially, because I just remember when I first sat down to listen to this one, just being so stunned by the entire experience. Like, I just sat there and listened to the entire 50 minutes of the composition, essentially, taking in all of those strange details as I just stared into the album's artwork, into the very holes of those structures, waiting for them to just start swelling with the very breaths of air themselves. Like, it really fascinates me how much of this album just sort of captured my curiosity and interest when I first heard it. And like I said, it is one of my favourites from Roden and easily one of my most played tracks by Steve Roden, as it's one that I just seem to really respond to every time I go to listen to it. One that I'm just completely lulled by the hypnotic sounds, and it just completely lifts me out of time itself, completely unaware that even an hour has even passed by the time it's all over. As a result, it is an incredible experience to sit down and listen with, and there have been many moments where I've sat down with this one, both as active listening, where I've sat down and just taken all the details, to even listening to this as you fall asleep into a slumber. It feels like when you do so in that context, the very breaths of air themselves that are produced in this music just start to even influence your own breath as you just start to slowly and gently fall to sleep. And as a result, it is a very fascinating experience indeed. But with that, I think we have actually come to the end of today's episode of Weird Music. A bit of a shorter one for Steve Roden, but that is grand. They're all quite random lengths, I have to say. But yeah, very glad to have returned to the wonderful world of Steve Roden here. Airforms is just an incredible album experience to me, one that ranks amongst Roden's absolute best, I feel, because I feel like there's a weird sense of musicality being found in the lowercase notions here. A lot of Steve Roden's works are very experimental, very peculiar in how they sort of adapt, sound, art, and exploration into the construction of these experiences for us. And a fair few become very musical from time to time, but this one really pulls you into sort of that sense of musicality, even though there's something so weird and alien about it. At the core of it all, this is just classic Roden, though, I have to say. Classic sound exploration that ties into such an unusual concept. Nobody does it quite like Steve Roden, hence why I'm always excited to present his music on the show. It's such a wide body of work, all strange little sound journeys into the bewildering and unknown. So yeah, if you have made it this far, then I would like to thank you for watching today's episode of Weird Music. We will definitely be exploring some more of Steve Roden's work in the future. Not sure what we're going to land on next, but we'll see what ends up coming up though. We'll just have to see when we get around to it. For now, I wish you all the best though. Hope you take care, and bye bye for now. Bye bye.